Hi, I'm Jenny of Sincerely Jen Patterns. Welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be making the Rachel handbag. This handbag features this cute bow detail on the front exterior of the bag. There is a slip pocket behind that bow. There's another slip pocket on the back. We also have a D-ring on the front and back for hanging bag charms, so those are optional. We have D-rings on the inside for the crossbody connectors to connect to. There's a recessed zipper. We have a zipper overlay, which also has a slip pocket in the bottom. So the overlay, there you can see that. And then on the opposite side, we have a divided slip pocket that has a vinyl accent along the top edge. The handbag size is perfect size for carrying in the crook of your arm. It's about 11.5 inches wide, 4.5 inches deep this way, and 9.5 inches tall to this upper edge, which is perfect size for me for a handbag. The pattern does include 2 sizes, so if this handbag is too small for you, there is also a tote size included. We sew this bag in a separate video, but both patterns come together. This shows the size difference. The tote measures 14 inches wide, 5.5 inches deep, and 11.5 inches tall. This shows the comparison of the two next to each other. And there are longer handles written into the pattern for the tote size so that you can wear it over your shoulder. But you could also put longer handles on the handbag size if that's what you prefer. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of Rachel, and please share your finished bags in my Facebook group. I love to see what everybody makes. If you are not already following me, make sure you hit the subscribe button. All right, so we are going to start with each of the 4 handle panels. 2 are cut from the exterior and 2 from the contrast. You will mark a line vertically down the center on the wrong side of each of the handle panels. I used 1/2 inch double-sided tape directly over the line. And then we're going to fold each of the long raw edges into the marked center line. Now we're going to put a row of 1/2 inch wide double-sided tape down the wrong side of 2 of the handle panels. So I'll just put it down the exterior ones. And then I'm just taking one of the contrast handle panels and placing it wrong sides together with the exterior one, and make sure that I keep them lined up perfectly. And repeat that with the other two handle panels. It's not lined up very good at all. Okay, the top side will be, all right, so we're going to sew down each long edge of both of the handles using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. The bottom or the ends of the handles will be within a seam. You won't see it, so you can just rotate and stitch across and then stitch back down the other side if you choose. All right, I wasn't sure about that contrast stitching, but I actually really like it. Repeat with the other handle. All right, so once we have the handles finished, we're going to make the crossbody strap. The crossbody strap for the handbag size and the tote size are exactly the same. So I'm going to right here insert the making of the crossbody strap that I made for the tote size. Same exact process. You're just going to notice that it doesn't match this. All right, so for the bow, we want to take a strip of 1/2 inch wide double-sided tape. You could also use 1/4 inch wide for this. And I'm placing it directly down the back. I'm not putting it on these little tabs. The bow back is just a rectangle, and you just want to stick the bow front in place, making sure that it's centered decently. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we're going to sew not around these tabs, just around this part. Looks like little goggles. All right, now you want to trim all the way around the bow front. Trim the bow back away. Trim the extra of the bow back to match the bow front. All right, now we want to cut 2 of the tabs off. So one that's on the bow back and one on the other end from the bow front. So we want to have 2 tabs left that are opposite because they'll nest together. I'm going to use a small piece of 1/4 inch double-sided tape. I'm going to stick that to the center. And fold the edge down that is, like that, so that you have the raw edge facing up. And then I'm going to take another tiny little piece of tape and place it there. And then we'll stick the other tab down on that. So the 2 tabs are wrong sides together behind this bow center area. All right, and then we're just going to stitch right in the middle of this. And it's really only a couple of stitches. And this will be covered up, so it doesn't have to be neat, just enough to hold the bow together. All right, then we have our bow center. If you're using an especially thin vinyl, you may want to put 2 1/2 inch wide strips of this wrong sides together before you top stitch. With the regular Luxe vinyl from Warmy Now, 1 layer is plenty. And don't worry about how it's stretching. It won't look like that once I sew down the other side. All right, so now we're going to set the bow and bow center aside. This is what that's going to look like. Okay, so we want to take the accent stripe that has the bow support attached, and we are going to measure and mark we're going to measure 1/4 inch from the top edge of the bow support. And we want to make a line that is 1/2 inch wide. And do the same from the bottom edge of the bow support. All right, now along those 2 lines, you're going to take your seam ripper, very carefully cut all the way down the length of the marked lines through the accent stripe contrast vinyl and through the Decoville Heavy. All right, now we're going to take one of the exterior mains, place it right side up, we're going to place the accent stripe that we just marked and cut right side down, matching the bottom edge of the accent stripe up to the top edge of the exterior main. And we will take one of the bottom accent panels, place it right side down along the bottom edge of the exterior main. All right, and then we're going to sew this together, both pieces, using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, with the bottom accent, we can press that down away from the exterior main with the seam allowance pressed toward the bottom accent, and we're going to top stitch using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. All right, this is a good time if you want to put a tag on the exterior. Do we like that one? I kind of like the brown. Or I have this. No. Or I have this. I think I'm going to go with the silver. Anyway, now is a good time to think about where you want to attach your name tag or nameplate. I'm going to find the center. I'm not going to mark anywhere that you can see with this purple pen, but I'm just going to eyeball it and stick it on upside down. But this is easier to sew on now before you get too far and have the pockets in place. It's cute. All right, and I don't back stitch on my tags, so I'm just going to sew around it. I'm going to use a smaller stitch length. If anybody knows the perfect stitch length for these tags, let me know, because I always have to do like one short stitch. I'm using a stitch length of 4 right now, which actually looks good for the length. We'll see how it does for the short sides. Yeah, that one's a little too far from the top. And then I stop sewing in the hole where I started. So when I get back to the beginning, I'll bring my needle down in the same exact hole. And then from the back, pull the thread tails and you'll get 2 little loops. And then I stick my closed snips inside the loop and pull the top thread to the back. All right, and then I find it easiest to cut them all the same length. And then I just grab 2 in one hand and 2 in the other. And I'm going to tie a square knot. Beautiful. Okay, now for the handle. We are not going to top stitch anything on this panel just yet. Eventually we will. Not now. Okay. So right now we want to take one of our handles, and this D-ring is optional, but if you want to have a D-ring on the exterior for charms or whatever, now is the time to add it. We are going to measure 2. I should have done this first. All right, so center is marked from when I cut it. I'm going to transfer that marking over to the front edge. Okay, and I want to measure 2 3/4 inches from the center along the top edge. And we're going to mark to either side of that, or to each side. So 2 3/4 to the left, 2 3/4 to the right. And then we want to take our handle and place it to the outside of each of those marks. And we're going to baste it in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I want it contrast side down on the right side of the accent stripe. All right, we're going to set that aside. We want to take one of the top panels. We're going to mark the center. So I'm just going to snip into that a tiny bit. And we want to mark the center along the top of a slip pocket lining. Marked it so small that you can't even see it. Okay, we're going to place those right sides together. Hopefully I don't regret my lining choice because this is a little bit thicker than what I would like. I recommend waterproof canvas or waterproof canvas light. I like the Mormino Renew canvas. That's really nice. I just am very short on solid colors. Okay, we're going to sew this along that pocket panel only using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Very important that the seam allowance is correct. All right, now we want to press the slip pocket lining panel away from the exterior top, and we're going to top stitch it using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. The seam allowance is folded back behind the pocket panel, and we want to make sure that we're pulling these two pieces away from each other the entire time. It needs to be folded back completely. All right, now this part will seem a little bit tricky. First, we want to measure and mark 4.5 inches from each short end of the exterior top along the bottom straight edge. So where the pocket is attached. Measure and mark 4 inches. And I also like to mark out my seam allowance there. So 3/8. And then we'll do the same on the other side. Oh, the stuff's in my way. Let's do this the smart way. Which is not what I'm doing, but it's fine. All right, so your 3/8 inch mark should not be on the Decoville light, and it should be above the stitching. All right, now I like to use a piece of double-sided tape here. I don't know where I put it. Okay, so I'm going to, on the right side, just along, I do want 1/8 inch. Okay, so on the right side, I want to put a piece of 1/8 inch tape. This is not required. I just find that it makes it a little easier. I'm going to put it right above the pocket, and I don't want it to go any farther than that 4.5 inches. So that's it, just this little tiny piece. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And it's just going to help hold this next step in place. So we want to place the top panel right sides together with the accent stripe. And we're matching the top of the top panel up with the top of the accent stripe, which is a little bit tricky because you can't see the whole thing because of the pocket lining panel sticking out from in between. So we're going to do this in a couple little steps. So I'm matching up the ends, and then I have that double-sided tape in there. So if you kind of fold the pocket back, you can make sure that the top of the top panel is lined up with the top of the accent stripe. And once that's lined up, stick that double-sided tape down in place. I'm actually going to place a couple clips in the center where we're not sewing. I think this should be okay and will help to hold things together. All right, fold the pocket back. We want to make sure that we're not sewing over any portion of the pocket at this point. We're going to sew directly along the marked line, starting at the end. So we're using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is directly along that line that we marked. And you're going to sew all the way down to the other marked line, which should be just past the handle. And just make sure that your pocket is not in the way. And then when you get to the end, back stitch it back across the handle. And then we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. Make sure that the D-ring is not in the way. It's kind of just free floating right now. Make sure that the handle is not like pulling weird. All right, now we're going to pop this up, kind of unfold this. It's still a little weird since nothing is top stitched yet. I need to make a note for this. The easier way to do this is to top stitch it before, or to mark this line before sewing anything. Oh, it's exactly the top line of the bow center. Okay, so we are going to take the bow. You can use a piece of double-sided tape on the center portion of the bow if you want to. And right now what I'm doing is just sliding the end if I can. If my slit is not quite wide enough, I'm just going to Make it a tiny bit wider. And these slits don't have to be super perfect. You won't see them. Okay, so I slide 1/2 in, wrap around the bow. It can be loose at this point, and we'll pull it tight. So we're going to tuck, and honestly, leave it big, and then slide the whole bow in. That's easier. All right, so get the top in, got the bottom in. Tweezers are helpful for that as well. Hopefully I don't pull it back out. All right, so once I've got it wrapped around the bow, I'm going to flip to the back and pull both ends nice and tight. I'm going to look on the front side and make sure that my bow looks right. This seam allowance will be pressed up toward the back of the accent stripe. You can use double-sided tape for this if that would be helpful, which I will use a little bit here just to make sure that the bow center stays in place. So I'm folding that seam allowance up under the bow center, and then I'm going to take another piece of tape and put it on the bow center piece and pull it down tight. All right, and then we want to carefully top stitch this, making sure that all of this top stuff stays out of the way. Since it's not top stitched yet, it's kind of a little awkward, I guess. Yeah, so just make sure as you sew this that the seam allowance is all folded up behind the accent stripe. Okay. Now from the wrong side, we want to press these seam allowances open. So I am going to use 1/4 inch double-sided tape along this seam because it's easier for me to press that seam open if it's taped in place, especially along the pocket opening since there's no sewing there. For me to get it like as perfect as I can, it's easier if I tape it, and that's also why I marked this 3/4 inch line down from the top, because that's how far down I need to fold that. All right, so this seam allowance is going to be pressed open. The handle needs to face up. Once you face the handle up, that really helps this to lay properly. All right, and then along the opening, we just want to fold that seam allowance back to the marked line. All right, and I do have that 1/8 inch double-sided tape right here that I used sewing the top panel in place, and that's fine because it's not going to show on the exterior, because now we need to place the other lining panel in place. So I'm going to put another row of tape here, just beneath where the pocket is on the seam allowance of the accent stripe. And then we're going to align the raw edge of the lining pocket panel, slip pocket lining, with the raw edge of the accent stripe seam allowance. You can trim off the extra from the bow center if you want to. All right, make sure that this stays facing up and that seam allowance stays pressed open. And we're going to top stitch that using a 1/8 inch seam allowance through the accent stripe. Here you want to make sure that you're not sewing through this top pocket panel at all, but the bottom one will be sewn into the seam. And we'll fold the bow back out of the way. We want to flip this over. We're going to fold that top seam allowance down. It might be a little easier to crease everything from the right side. And then we want to align the pocket panels and clip them together along the sides and bottom. The top one might be a little bit longer. That's okay. All right, and this is easier to sew up one side, up the other side, and then across the bottom at the end. So we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When you get up toward the top, you can sew right along this seam allowance up to that other line of stitching. Just don't go past the stitching. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Should really replace this. Again, don't stitch past that stitching, but right up to it is fine. All right, and then we'll sew the bottom closed. All right, and then you don't have to trim the pocket. I'm going to trim the bottom seam allowance off a little bit, just so that it doesn't get caught in the seam when I attach the bottom panel. All right, so now this is the exterior front. This D-ring is not going to be fastened on until the very end, but now you have a little sneaky slip pocket here that you can't even really see. Perfect to put your phone in, or keys, other things. It's pretty big. All right, so we're going to do the same thing to assemble the exterior back. The only thing that we're doing different is that there's no bow, so we don't have the bow stabilizer piece. So we're placing the accent stripe right side together, and then the bottom accent right sides together. We're going to sew this together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, one thing that's different here, because we don't have a bow to attach, I can top stitch both of these panels right now. So I'm going to fold them away from exterior main. Seam allowance is toward the accent panels on both. This is so beautiful. All right, now it's definitely easier without the bow. So if you wanted to make one with no bow, it would be simple, more simple 2 3/4. So center is marked on the back, roughly. Let's find the center. Okay, and from that center mark, we're going to measure 2 3/4 inches to either side. All right, we're going to place one end of the handle to the left of the left mark, and I slipped one D-ring on. And I'm going to place the other to the right of the right mark. Make sure your handle's not twisted. All right. Now, again, I should have done this beforehand, but I want to measure and mark 3/4 inch down from the top edge. I'm going to make sure I put that in the pattern. While I'm filming this video, the pattern is still in testing. By the time the pattern is released, it has been fully tested. All changes have been made. I have a whole team of testers that are actively making the pattern right now. And sometimes the more I make it, I find little tips that make things easier, this being one of them. All right, so again, we want to mark the center along the top edge of an exterior top panel, and then mark the center along one long edge of a slip pocket lining panel. Place those right sides together, matching the centers. Okay, and then we have to sew this together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're precise about that. All right, and then fold the lining away from the top panel. Make sure that it is pulled completely away and top stitch using a 1/8 inch seam allowance along the top folded edge. It's very important that it is folded back completely. All right, now I want to place these right sides together, matching the top edge. Let's see how this works with no tape, because I don't know if the tape helped or not. You know what I didn't do? I didn't mark my seam allowance. 4.5 inches. Now let's try that again. All right, and I'm folding this back just to get a feel to make sure everything is straight. I'm going to clip it, but we're not going to sew through this lining panel at all. So I will make sure I fold that out of the way before I sew. Which actually last time did I fold it over the front? That's probably a better idea. Excuse me. Okay. Yes. I'm going to fold it over here just so that I can make sure everything is lined up, but I'm not going to sew it down. I'm just going to hold this in place. And I'll move that before I sew anything on that side. All right, so now we're sewing directly along the marked lines from the end. And then stop at the end of the marked line, back stitch across the end of the handle. All right, now we're repeating that same exact thing on the other end. Okay, now flip this over. We're going to end up flipping the seam open. So again, same as on the other side. In order to do that, I'm going to place a row of 1/8 inch double-sided tape along the seam allowance, along the top raw edge of the seam allowance. All right, now we are pressing the seam open. The seam allowance of the top panel is pressed up toward the back of the top panel, and the seam allowance of the accent stripe is pressed down toward the wrong side of the accent stripe. And then I'm just sticking it down with the tape. All right, I'm going to make sure that it looks okay from the right side. And now I'm going to take another piece of tape and place it along the folded back seam allowance on the accent panel beneath the slip pocket lining that's already attached. And I'm going to place it right side down and up over the other panel. The long raw edge of the slip pocket lining will match up to the raw edge of the accent stripe seam allowance. All right, now make sure that seam stays pressed open. Both of the pockets are up, and we're going to top stitch through the accent panel, through the accent stripe, below the top panel, and just make sure that the seam allowance stays pressed open the whole time. All right, I'm folding that top seam allowance now down over the accent stripe, clipping together the sides first of the slip pocket lining panels, and then the bottom. All right, then we're going to sew from the bottom up. All right, again, I'm going to trim the seam allowance down just so that I hopefully don't catch it when I sew the bottom panel into place. All right, it's easier to really get that top seam allowance pressed down from the right side. All right, now we want to take the exterior front and exterior back, place them right sides together. We're going to match up the sides, making sure that all of the seams line up where we've attached the accent stripes and the bottom accent panels. I think I skipped a stitch. I should know better. My sewing machine does not like changing from something that's not thick to something that is thick. I usually use my hump jumper. All right, this was a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which I'm going to trim down to about, cut it in half. All right, let's go ahead and mark the centers in such a way that I'll be able to see them from the right side. All right, now if you wanted to, for a cute little detail, if you top stitch around the bottom panel using a 3/4 inch seam allowance, you'll have a nice little cutesy line of top stitching. Let's actually go ahead and do that. I'm not going to back stitch. I will pull my threads to the back and tie them off. So I'm just using a 3/4 inch seam allowance right now. Let me move this. All right, and then when I get back to where I started, I'm going to bring my needle back down in the same exact hole. All right, and then I'm tying a square knot. All right, now I'm going to snip into the seam allowance no more than about 1/4 inch all the way around the curved edges. It may seem a little bit excessive, but it definitely helps the bottom panel to fit really nicely. All right, and then we're going to place, I need to mark my centers here. I mean, they're marked on the wrong side. I just can't see it on the right side. All right, we're going to place the bottom panel right sides together with the bottom accent panel and match the center on one of the long edges first. And then I put a couple clips to hold that in place. And then match the center of the other long edge. And then We're going to match the center of the short side to the seam on the side of the bag. And then I find it easier to go from like the front or back to the side to clip the rest together. If you like to use staples, this is a good place for it. All right, I like to use my zipper foot. It's not necessary, it's just easier for me. All right, we're going to sew all the way around the bottom panel using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. As you sew around the bottom panel, make sure that you don't get the pocket panels caught in the seam. All right, it's easier to sew this around the end with your left hand inside the bag. And then you can kind of use it to help rotate the bag to sew around the edge, the ends. All right, now I'm going to look around my seam and make sure that I don't see any puckers. I actually have kind of a weird spot here, so I'm going to fix that. So you can see that the bottom panel kind of got away from the main panel. So I'm just going to rip out a few stitches. This is an easy fix. Kind of separate that, pull the extra stitches out. All right, I'm going to trim the seam allowance down in about in half. So I like to say about 2/4 of an inch, but I probably cut half of it off, which is a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch that I'm cutting off, and a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch that's remaining. Whatever half of 3/8 is. It's 3/16. I will not ever put 3/16 in my pattern. I think that's a little bit too specific. All right, now at this step, the most important thing is that you peek inside of your bag and admire your work so far. It looks so cute already. So cute. And then we're going to make the lining, which is also so cute. Okay, with the overlay slip pocket lining wrong side up, we're going to measure and mark a line that is 1 inch down from the top straight edge. All right, and then I'm going to use double-sided tape directly along the marked line. And then I will fold the top straight edge down to that marked line. All right, now on the wrong side of the zipper pocket overlay, I'm going to use my 1/8 inch double-sided tape for this, and I'll actually place it on the lining piece. just along the folded portion. And then we're going to align this so it directly lines up so that the lining falls directly along the bottom edge of the bottom box. And this lining piece should be 1/8 of an inch smaller all the way around than the overlay, which I'm going to, so you want to make sure it's centered from left to right. Okay. And the purpose of that is just so that you don't have any of the lining peeking out. All right, now, okay, on the right side, I'm going to mark with my silver marking pen because I can just wipe it off. 1/8 of an inch down from the bottom edge and 1/8 of an inch in from the side. And I'm just going to put a dot because that's where we want to start our stitching. I'm not going to backstitch here. I'm going to leave the thread tails longer so that I can tie them off on the wrong side. And I'm going to bring my needle down directly on that first dot and then top stitch all the way along the bottom edge of the bottom cutout using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to stop exactly at the next marked dot, which actually looks a little bit low. So I'm going to be in line with it, but not on it. Okay, leave the tails a little bit longer. And now I'll just pull on the bobbin thread to bring the top thread to the back and tie a square knot on each side. All right, now if you look at step 24 and the way that that stitching goes, I'm just kind of marking out a little guide for myself. What is 1/8 of an inch above the bottom cutout box so that I can kind of know where my line should be. And I just am placing a couple dots there. All right, now we want to take a lining main panel, right side up, and we're going to measure 3/8 of an inch down from the top and centered. Not 3/8 of an inch, 3/4, no. Yes, 3/4 of an inch. All right, on the wrong side of the zipper overlay, I use 1/8 inch tape for this. So I'm going to place it all the way around the outer edges only. So around the outer edge of the top portion. And then around the outer edge of this bottom portion. And you can also use, let me lift this up, you can use tape under the lining to hold it in place. So I'm raising my lining up and placing the tape directly along the edges on the sides and bottom, which will partially hold the lining in place because I am in a little bit from the edge, and then it will also hold the overlay pocket in place on the lining main panel. Okay, centered from left to right, 3/4 of an inch from the top straight edge. All right, now we're going to start sewing, yes, right here on the same bottom edge, and sew using a 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. You want to leave your thread tails long again because we will tie them off when we're done. All right, and then turn here and stop right where you started stitching. All right, and then leave these thread tails long as well. All right, so we have this. You have a small box on each end, and then it is sewing around the bottom of the slip pocket portion. We're going to pull the top threads through to the back again, and we'll tie a square knot in the end of each of these. Now we're going to sew around the outer edge of the zipper overlay. And you're going to leave these threads long once more and tie them off when you're done. And I'm using a 1/8 inch seam allowance here. Ideally, you'll be stitching directly over the stitches that you sewed on that top portion prior to this previously. Yeah, that's why I measure and mark out where I'm sewing. All right, and then when you get back to where you started, I'm just pulling the first top thread through to the back from where I started because it's easier. And then I'm going to bring my needle down in the same exact hole from the first stitch. And then we'll flip that over and pull on the other bobbin thread, pull the top thread to the back. And now I grab 2 threads in each hand and tie them in a square knot. All right, now we want to, dog hair. Gross. Okay, so now you have a lined slip pocket here. And here we're going to have our zipper pocket. So from the right side, I fold this in half and just cut through the lining main in that opening. And then I'm going to cut the lining main out of the inside of the overlay area, this top portion of it only. About 1/4 inch or so away from the sewn box. I'm going to try my smaller scissors for this. Yeah, I feel like the smaller ones are actually a little easier to use for this purpose. Maybe it doesn't look easier, does it? So I'm just being really careful not to cut the overlay at all. And to make sure that I stay far enough away from the stitching. Okay, it doesn't have to look pretty. All right, for the interior zipper pocket panel, for the interior zipper pocket, we're going to take one interior zipper pocket panel and the 10-inch length of zipper. I'm going to use 1/8 inch double-sided tape, which I always use when attaching my zippers for my interior zipper pockets because I feel like I end up having less waviness if I tape my zippers. And I think it just helps to avoid like stretching or the zipper tape moving at all. And I'm just going to line the zipper right side up on the right side of the interior zipper panel. All right, and then I'm going to sew that in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. on the wrong side, I'm going to place another row of tape just in that seam allowance. All right, I'm going to press the zipper away from the right side of the lining main panel, or of the lining. I'm pressing the interior zipper pocket panel away from the zipper. So the wrong side of the interior zipper pocket panel is now facing up and the zipper is facing right side up. And then I'm pressing that down and I'm going to top stitch this using a 1/8 inch seam allowance along the edge of the zipper. All right, now we're going to repeat this same process with the other interior zipper pocket panel. So tape along one long edge on the right side. And then I'm going to place the zipper right side up, and the two interior zipper pocket panels are right sides together. All right, I'm just trying to make sure I keep this even. All right, sew that together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and then on the wrong side, we're going to use the 1/8 inch tape in the seam allowance. All right, press the zipper and the lining main panel away from each other, and then we're going to top stitch this using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. All right, so I find it easier to sew that to the panels and then put the zipper pull on. So to put the zipper pull on, I'm just going to separate the zipper tape at one end and slide 1/2 of the zipper tape into the open end, or the bigger end of the zipper pull, and then slide it down. Make sure that the teeth at the end are aligning the same as they were when you put it on. All right, now we want to take the overlay, and I'm going to use 1/8 inch tape along the bottom of the opening and then along the top of the opening. All right, so I just center the zipper within the opening on the overlay. All right, so it's centered from top to bottom, and then I kind of center the zipper pocket behind the overlay. So it's off a little bit, but it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. See, my zipper is wavy. I feel like there's something with the tension on my machine or something. I don't know. All right, so I once again leave the thread tails long for this and pull them to the wrong side and tie a knot. I like to start sewing around this box in the upper right hand corner, and I use a 1/8 inch seam allowance to sew all the way around the smaller opening. And we'll move the zipper pull out of the way as needed. All right, we're just going to tie these off into a square knot. All right, we're going to fold the top interior zipper pocket panel down over the bottom one. So they're right sides together. And we're just going to clip along the side edges. Okay, and then we're going to trim the longer panel to be even with the top panel. All right, and now we want to just sew along the side only using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And I do like to back stitch over the end of the zipper just to make sure that that's not going to come apart at some point. All right, and I'm just going to unzip that zipper right now so that I don't forget later. Set this lining main panel aside. Now we're going to take the two lining divided slip pocket panels, place them right sides together. If your fabric is directional, you want to be clipping the bottom edge together. Okay, we're going to sew this using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, now we're going to flip this so the panels are wrong sides together. All right, once these are flipped wrong sides together, I like to just make sure that that bottom seam is pressed out really well. If you kind of, I don't know, roll it between your fingers, I guess. And I'm just going to place some clips on it to make sure that it stays in place. Sometimes words are hard. All right, and then I'm going to clip together along the top edge. And I'm going to baste that together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just because it's going to make it easier to attach the accent. All right, now on the wrong side of the divided slip pocket accent, I'm going to measure 1/2 inch in from one long edge and mark the center. I'm going to use 1/4 inch tape along each of the long raw edges. All right, if you have a little tag that you want to slip into this, now is a good time. I have a "That's What She Said" tag. The colors coordinate with what I'm doing, so why not? All right, with the accent wrong side up, I'm going to place the top edge of the divided slip pocket just beneath the marked line and stick it down in place. And then I'm going to remove the top portion of the paper and fold the accent piece over. When you're choosing a spot for your tag, if you want to use one here, we're going to be sewing a line 2.5 inches in from each of the long raw edges. So just make sure that you are away from that. And there will be one in the center as well. All right, and you can use clips here to hold this together if you need to. We're going to top stitch using a 1/8 inch seam allowance along the bottom raw edge of the accent piece. All right, so now we need to measure and mark the lines in step number 32. So you'll want to use a chalk pencil for this or something that can be erased. All right, so we're going to measure 2.5 inches in from each side and draw a line. Seven and a half inches from the edge because this is 15 inches wide. So I'll kind of make a couple marks along the center and then line my ruler up to draw a full line. All right, and then we want to measure 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom center. So the bottom is not straight. The center portion of the bottom is straight, but the edges curve up slightly. So find 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom center. All right, I'm going to use some of these clips to hold it in place. This recycled nylon is just a little bit slippery for this application, so it's maybe a little bit more difficult than if you are using waterproof canvas. All right, these type of clips definitely work best for this sort of application. All right, and then you can trim the sides to be even now if you want. It might make it easier to sew. All right, we're going to use a 1/8 inch seam allowance, starting on the right side. So all the way down to the bottom of the divided slip pocket. Rotate, also using a 1/8 inch seam allowance to sew along the bottom until just before you get to the first marked line. At which point you'll rotate and use a 1/8 inch seam allowance next to that line. If you want to, I'm going to sew all the way up to the top. If you choose, you cannot sew through the overlay portion and you can place a rivet at the top of this. But otherwise, I just rotate and sew one stitch over, rotate, and then sew back down. And also using a 1/8 inch seam allowance the whole time. And then all the way over to just before the center line. And you can even sew up to the top and then also install a rivet inside the stitching at the top of each line. All right, now if you did not already, make sure that you trim the sides of this pocket to be even with the sides of the lining main. We're now going to call this the lining front. All right, on the wrong side of a crossbody connector, you want to measure and mark the center, which is 3/4 of an inch from the edge. All right, I'm going to use my 1/2 inch tape directly along the marked center line. All right, and then fold both of the long raw edges into the center. All right, we're going to top stitch along each of the long folded edges using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Sewed them together. Okay. Now we want to take the remaining 2 D-rings, fold those over, and base the ends of the connector together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, now on each of the lining panels, the lining front and lining back, we want to measure 3/4 of an inch in from the top corner. I'm just going to mark that right along the edge. And this is the top right corner. And then you want to take one of the connectors, place it inside that mark with the top edge extending past the top raw edge of the lining main by 3/8 of an inch. So you're lining that stitching line up, the basting stitch up with the top edge of the main panel, and then baste in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll repeat that with the other one. All right, place those or set those panels aside. Now on the wrong side of all 4 of the lining zipper panels. All right, with all 4 zipper panels wrong side up, we're going to measure and mark 1 inch in from each of the short ends because we need to fold each of the short ends to the back, to the wrong side by 1/2 inch. So I like to mark my lines first. So I'm going to mark 1 inch, and then line up the other end and do the same. It's a little backwards how I'm holding these. All right, and then I'm going to use my 1/2 inch tape and place it on the wrong side, just past that line on both ends. And then I'm going to fold each of the raw ends to meet that marked line. So we've got 1/2 inch folded to the back. And this would honestly be easier for me if I rip them apart. I'm on the struggle bus today. Hope this video turns out educational enough. All right, this tape tears, but it tears easier when the paper's still on it, apparently. Right, with one of the panels right side up, we're going to place the 13-inch zipper right side down. We've got the top edges of the zipper folded back. And I'm just going to clip this into place. All right, and then I like to sew along, we're going to sew along this edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and don't sew past the end of the zipper panel, because if you do, the stitches will be visible on the zipper. All right, and then we'll take another zipper panel and place it right sides together with that one, with the zipper sandwiched in between. And then we're going to sew this together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. To get a true 3/8 inch seam allowance, I have to put my zipper foot on, which I don't want to. So I'm just using as close as I can get to 3/8, and that is fine for this point. There are some portions where it's very imperative that the seam allowance is correct, but typically on the zipper panels, it's not a big deal if the seam allowance is just a little bit smaller. Not a form. All right, now we're going to fold the zipper panels away from the zipper and wrong sides together, which I find it easier to do that with the zipper zipped. And then we're just going to clip all the way together along the raw edge. All right, we're going to sew this together using a 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the zipper panels. Delete my head. I'm going to repeat this with the other zipper panels. Which I like to get these in place while the zipper is closed so that I can make sure that it matches up, or that they're aligning with the ones that are already attached to the zipper. And I think this time, instead of doing this in 2 separate steps, I'm going to sew it all at one time. So I'm placing one zipper panel on top, clipping it in place, placing the other zipper panel behind the zipper and aligned with the first one, and then clipping that all in place. And you can sew this in 1 step or 2, it just shifts less. You have less risk of it shifting if you sew it in 2 separate steps. So here I'm just going to go right in closer to that 3/8 inch seam allowance, or using a 3/8 inch seam allowance if your presser foot allows. And just take your time and make sure that the zipper is not moving as you sew. All right, now we're going to top stitch around these zipper panels using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. All right, for the zipper tab, I'm going to place 2 rows of 1/2 inch double-sided tape on the back of the tab. I like for the whole thing to be sticky, personal preference. I'm going to place the end of the zipper inside the tab, kind of centered as best as possible, and then fold the tab over the end of the zipper, matching up the raw edges. And then I'm going to trim the sides of the tab to be even with the sides of the zipper. And then we're just going to top stitch this in place using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And I will use my hump jumper because my sewing machine always leaves loops in the back when I sew over a zipper like this, if I don't. All right, now we want to, with the lining back right side up, we're going to find the center real quick on both sides of the zipper panels. Okay, and you also want to find the center along the top of both of the lining main panels. Okay, with the lining back panel right side up, I'm going to match the centers up of the zipper panel, making sure that both of these zippers are closing toward the left. Okay, we're going to base this in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, and then I want to take one of the top lining top panels and place it right side down. All right, I'm going to take my lining top panel and find the center along the long straight edge of that. Line it up with the center of the zipper panel and lining main. And then place it right side down over the zipper panels and lining main and clip along the long straight edge. All right, now we're going to sew this together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When I get down here to the crossbody connector, I'm going to back stitch over that. All right, now I want to press the seam allowance down toward the lining main and fold the top panel and zipper panels up away from the lining main. Then I'm going to top stitch using a 1/8 inch seam allowance beneath the zipper panel and beneath the top main or top lining top panel. And the whole time that I'm sewing, I'm actively pulling the top panel, zipper panel, and lining main panel away from each other. Okay, so I'm going to center my zipper panel. I've got the two lining main panels right sides together. Clip the zipper panel in place. And then I'm going to mark the center along the long straight edge of the other lining top panel. Match up the centers. And then clip all of that in place. All right, now sew this together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. The top of the other top panel should not be so close to where you're sewing that it is a concern, but make sure that it's not in the seam somehow. And then once again, when you reach the other crossbody connector, you'll want to backstitch over that. All right, now repeat the process to top stitch beneath the top panel. The seam allowance is down toward the back of the top panel, and the seam allowance is down toward the back of the main panel, and the top panel and zipper panel are folded up away from the main panel. You're top stitching using a 1/8 inch seam allowance beneath the zipper panel. Okay, we're going to go ahead and install rivets here, just right above the stitching and centered. So I'm measuring about 1/8 inch up. So the top of the rivet will be over that seam, and that's fine. All right, I'm going to punch my holes with this hole punch. I got this relatively inexpensive on Amazon, and it's easier for me. All right, so I'm just sticking the post of the rivet through the front and then sticking the cap on the back. Okay. Now that we have those in place, we're going to fold the bag so the lining is right sides together. Make sure that the seams between the top panels and the main panels are aligned. All right, we're going to sew. We'll start at the top using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And And I'm going to sew about 1 inch or so down from the top. And I do have to stay kind of around 3/8 while I sew next to that D-ring. But then as soon as I can, I'm going to increase my seam allowance to 1/2 inch and use that down the majority of the lining. And then when I get near the bottom, I will decrease my seam allowance back to 3/8 of an inch. We'll repeat this on the other side. All right, we're going to trim the seam allowance down, probably in half is my standard. Okay, once more, I'm going to make sure that I unzip my lining zipper pocket right now. I want to fold the lining bottom panel in half to mark the centers along both long edges. And then along the short curved edge as well. And again, you can clip into the seam allowance along the curved portion, the same way that we did with the exterior, to help it fit in there nicely, to help ease around the curves. That's a better way to say that. I, of course, did not mark the center along the bottom of the main panels, so let's do that right now. All right, now place the bottom right sides together with the lining main panel on one side. And then line up the center on the other side. And then match the center to the side seam on the short curved end. And then ease around the curves. Now we'll match at the other side seam and short curved edge. I think this lining fabric choice may be a little more difficult for this bag just because it's slippery. Again, if you are someone who likes to use staples, this is a good time to do that. All right, now we're going to sew this together using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure that the interior zipper pocket stays out of the way. I'm sorry, we're going to sew this part using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And that's going to help the lining fit nicely inside of the exterior. All right, now you want to trim this seam allowance down closer to 1/8 of an inch, probably, maybe a little over 1/8, but less than 1/4. And that's also just going to help the lining sit down inside of the exterior nicely. All right, I'm going to turn the lining right side out. Once more, make sure that the interior zipper pocket is unzipped. I'm going to take my lining, or my exterior, and I want to place the side that has the slip pocket on it along the side with the bow. So the zipper pocket will be in the back of the bag, so it's along the side that does not have the bow. And you want to fold the handles down inside. And we're also going to fold the zipper panels down in between the layers and the crossbody connector D-rings. So everything is just folded down in between the lining and exterior. So first I like to match up the seams on the side. So we've got exterior top panel, right sides together with the lining top panel. I'm going to match up the side seams and then place a clip on either side of that. And then match up the side seams on the other end. And I kind of fold the seam allowance on the exterior to the right and the seam allowance on the lining to the left. And then they kind of nest together. All right, and now I'm just matching up the curves along the top and clipping the rest of the way around the top panels. All right, once those are clipped together all the way around, you're just going to sew together around the top opening using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I like to start along one of the straight areas. That's easier than starting on a curve. And then just take your time, go all the way around the top. All right, some of this I need to kind of readjust as I go because, like I said before, the lining that I'm using is a little bit slippery. So it's kind of sliding around a little. Okay, now here, I'm not trimming the seam allowance because I feel like you get a nicer top stitch with the seam allowance still in there. But we're going to snip into the seam allowance all along the curved portion. Only about 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch or so. Do not trim through this line of stitching. All right, so now we're going to turn the whole bag right side out through the interior zipper pocket. It's gonna be a little bit tricky. Some people I know like to leave a seam open in the bottom, and I think if you did it along one of the long straight edges, that would be okay. And then you could turn your bag right side out through that opening, and then close it through the pocket, and then close the pocket lining. I do it that way in the Mr. Heckles, I believe. All right, so I like to push the exterior bottom panel from the wrong side and grab it through the bottom of the pocket. And I try not to completely crush it if I can help it, but sometimes that's not possible. Be mindful of where the bow is so you don't rip it off. All right, once you get past that point, you can kind of turn the exterior. I usually push the whole exterior right side out, opposite from, or the whole lining right side out, opposite from the exterior, and then push my hand down into the wrong side of the exterior to push that all out properly. All right, I'm going to kind of finger press around the bottom panel. Got my handles all weird here. What did I do? Okay, that's better. All right, and then I'm going to push the lining down inside the exterior. All right, the exterior top panel should want to naturally fold where it should at the seam because of the Decovil light on the inside. But I just kind of go around and roll the seam between my fingers to get the whole thing to turn nicely. All right, and this is the perfect step to top stitch this if you have a cylinder arm machine. Good time to use it. If not, then we make do, right? Okay, so I'm going to actually place some clips on the exterior, or on the top seam. Don't worry about the D-rings here at this point, because we'll fix those before we install the rivets. All right, so to top stitch this, let me see if I'm going to do. Okay, for top stitching, I could turn this inside out, but I'm not going to. So we are just going to try our best to, I like to do my top stitching from the exterior side. So I'm going to kind of squish it under my presser foot. Top stitch using a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to make sure that the handles stay out of this top stitching and that the zipper panels are folded back out of the way. And I'm guessing that in this process, I'm going to probably pop most of the clips off. So they're not really necessary. Just help me to hold the seam so it's laying as it should. So I just sew really slowly around this part. This is also one instance when a domestic sewing machine is handy for bags because you have the free arm capability. So you could slide the piece off, I don't know what it's called, and have your sewing machine be the free arm, and I guess essentially it's like a cylinder arm. Make sure that the zipper panels are out of the way and that the end of the zipper and that the zipper tab is also out of the way. And all of the adjusting that I'm doing, I make sure that I keep my needle down when I'm doing that. And that's it, and it's so nice because the handles are done. So now we literally have 4 rivets to place. Oh, we have to sew the bottom of the pocket closed. Let's do that real quick. Okay, I'm going to pull the interior zipper pocket out and fold the open raw edges toward the wrong side. I like to fold one side up, and then I'll kind of fold the bottom edge in. I don't even know how to explain it. All the way around, and then fold the 2 sides together, if that makes any sense. All right, now tuck the pocket back down inside. All right. We are going to measure 3/4 of an inch from the seam and centered. And make a mark. And we'll do that on both sides. All right, now I'm going to first punch the holes only in the handle because it's easier this way. Okay. All right, now I push the handle down against the right side of the exterior. The zipper panel is pushed away, so I'm holding the handle and the exterior and lining top panel in my hand only. Make sure that the handle is laying nice and even, and I place the hole punch right in the hole and punch through the exterior and lining top panel. And we'll do that with all 4 handle ends. Okay, once all those holes are punched, I'm going to use my rivet press and I've got 4 posts and 4 caps, and I'm going to install the rivets through the handles and the top panels. And I like to make sure that the D-rings are on the left side of the handle when I'm looking at it. All right, all 4 rivets have been set. You can install your crossbody strap if you choose to use one. And I'll just have to give the bag a final kind of press. I'll probably heat up my ironing board and then like press the bag against the hot ironing board to get out any wrinkles, but it really isn't bad. And that's that. That is the Rachel. Hopefully you have enjoyed watching this, and I can't wait to see your finished Rachel, and I hope that you will share in my Facebook group.